We are going to continue now with the next session, and that is an interview with Prof. Vukosi Marivate. Let me just make him a presenter quickly. Oh, you're already a presenter. And I've contacted Prof. Marivate about his interest and work in AI and African languages. Prof. Vukosi, welcome, and it's an honor for us to have you here as the last speaker of the symposium. And I think people get worried about the time. The time that we have is 20 minutes, so we are going to wrap it up within 20 minutes. And
Okay.
as we agreed on our email conversation, I'm going to give you an opportunity to just quickly talk about what you are doing, especially in the work of Lalapa, where you focus on the AI and the language, and then we can continue within some of the other questions that we have discussed.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll try. So, and just maybe coach my presentation. I do have something I can actually give shortly, and I will keep it to about 7 minutes. It's going to be a lot. Hello, everyone. I'm Vukosi. I am the chair of data science here at the University of Pretoria, but I'm also a co-founder of a company called Lalapa AI. I think thinking about Fortis and where you guys, the discussion points that have been going on over the period, I wanted to highlight a few things. So on my side, I sit in different spaces. At the university, I run the Data Science for Social Impact Research Group, where it's staff and students who mostly work on AI and African languages. I'm a co-founder of the Deep Learning Indaba, which is the largest AI gathering on the continent. I sit on the steering committee of Lacuna Fund that funds the creation of data for AI across the continent. I'm at YGL as well, so I'm at the forum of at World Economic Forum. I'll just switch off the video so that we're good. And then I sit on the board of Partnership on AI. So all of these is that I'm a community organizer when it comes to AI across the whole continent. And that's my group. As I said, 70% of our work is in this natural language processing, and especially in African languages, and about 30% is on data science and society. The one thing about, yes, AI being in our space at the moment is that we're just going through another hype cycle. This has been happening for us for the last 2 decades or so. But then I know with the latest one with generative models, it seems like, oh, AI is new. It's not. But we can learn from the past. One of the things is that most of the ideas will go away. And what do I mean when I say we've been going through this almost for like a decade? Here's a picture I wanted to highlight on the number of papers that show up on Archive. Archive is a preprint server. So for a lot of us, when we get a paper accepted for a conference or a journal, we also make a preprint available. But if we look at how many papers are showing up on Archive for machine learning and AI on a monthly basis, if you go back, about 10 to 15 years ago, it used to be maybe 100, 115, 150 papers happening, showing up a month. Right now, we're over 150 a day on Archive showing up. So it's just showing that we've been having exponential growth in this field for almost 2 decades, like 20 years. So there's lots of things that are going on. There's things that will happen, and things will change over time. And answer the question about thinking about how do our languages come in and how they might impact teaching, what we do have is that a lot of the models in these spaces won't work well with what we call low resource languages. And a lot of our languages in South Africa are classified as low resource. What does that mean? You might have many speakers, but not many resources. You don't have much data like speech, text. You don't have many tools. I could ask maybe in the chat, how many people in the chat here have for their home language? If we, for your home language, how many of you have a dictionary on your phone, on your computer, desktop, or laptop for that language? If you do, you can just, put a +1 in the chat so that we can see. Okay, we're at 2, there we were at 3, right? Yeah, and maybe I should have said that if we might have to exclude English and Afrikaans actually when it comes to this, but it's fine in those spaces. But typically what happens is that if I think about Setswana, Xitsonga, Sesotho, isiNdebele, typically people do not have these. And this shows you that you have a lot of people who speak those languages, millions, but then there's these tools. If you're thinking about you're going to engage, whether it's teaching and learning, research, it's much harder because those things are not available. So in this work by Joshi et al., they show the different levels of resourcefulness of languages, where they classify English, Spanish, German, Japanese, and French as being winners, and then the rest as falling under that. Like, there you see Zulu. Zulu is classified as a hopeful, meaning that there is an opportunity that it can actually continue and become better over time if resources are built for it. But for most of the world's languages, huge amounts of speakers, this is not true, and there's a higher chance that those languages are not going to be utilized in very important places, and they will kind of die over time. Remember, Africa has 2,000, 3,000 plus languages in a way. So now when you're thinking about the large language model, so these things where people are interacting with ChatGPT, with Gemini, with all the, with Llama, these systems, they are trained, especially using like the internet. If we use Wikipedia as a heuristic to train these, more like, that the data has to come from somewhere. Here, these are the amount of articles in Wikipedia in English. So it's almost 7 million articles. For the African continent, Egyptian Arabic is the one that has the highest, 1.6 million articles. But then if you go to Swahili, you're already down to 80,000. Afrikaans, I think, is about 100,000 now. If you go to Yoruba, 33,000. There's Zulu, only 11,000. Remember, we're going from 7 million articles written in English on Wikipedia and only 11,300 written in isiZulu. There's Sesotho, only at 949. And then right now, I think isiNdebele, last year, if you ask me this, I'll say there's no articles written in isiNdebele on Wikipedia. Now, I think we should have like in the tens because the South African government is actually paying for that to be created. The thing to understand about this and why we need to encourage and creating content, creating material in these spaces is that the more we wait to do that because we're waiting for some ideal, the more expensive it becomes to tackle this challenge. And government and higher education have always made these commitments, but are they actually doing it is a very different. And I always highlight to people, this is the same thing as having like a high interest credit card. The more you wait to try and say like, no, we'll solve it next year, the more expensive it becomes to pay off the debt of developing these languages to the point where now you can have tools that students can go and use in their language to get explanations, to get all those things. Those things become not available. I'm going to stop here. I'll provide a link to some of my other work when I talk. But the thing about me at Lelapa, for example, is that we are building tools in these spaces from the commercial space, and we have a whole research team to build things like speech recognition, translation, text-to-speech and analytics also in our languages as well. I'll stop there so that we can have a conversation for the rest of the 13 minutes or so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof, for that. And I think some of the questions you have addressed it's what's happening and where it's going. But even if you look at many of the work that's being done, it's also more in the business field. How does this translate down to education? Is it available for schools, or is it not on that level that we are looking? If we look at the dictionary, for example, can you maybe elaborate on that a bit? So in other words, how AI is now used in the African languages for maybe primary school learners or secondary school learners. Oh, I think I've lost him. Can we just give him a moment to reconnect? I think it's that whole thing of stopping the presentation throws the connectivity. Thank you, Prof. Are you back?
Hello, can you hear me now? Hi.
Okay, yes, I see you are reconnecting. Yeah. So we have lost you for a moment. Yeah.
You should be able to hear me now. Yeah. I was saying, yeah, for education, it's tough because a lot of times people, at the moment, especially with the generative models, people have been relying on these very big, large models that are mostly really working in English. It's not that they don't have some capabilities in, like, for example, isiZulu. But then once you get to very, like, specialized content, that's where things might go very badly, because you remember that these systems are trained from scripts of the internet. So if you start thinking, I'm in education maybe, and then I'm teaching physics, how much content is written in Zulu about physics? So you might have a higher chance of generating wrong information, and that then becomes a risk for teaching. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we can't find things that we can, like, help students in terms of maybe doing some simple translations of concepts that are much easier, and then also working with teachers to actually create more content in those languages, because then it becomes available to researchers both in the academic sense and also in the private sector, to then say, how do we extend this and make this available for more people? Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, definitely. It's still a huge task for us as lecturers, and then also for the teachers, to make sure that this can be used in the schools for other languages than English as well. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to go to the audience, and I don't think they are able to put their mics on, but if you have any questions that you want to ask Prof about the work of what he's doing, and also about the influence it might have on the learning of students, and that could most probably relate to English as well, because it's language that we are covering here, although the interest was in African language. Will you please type your question in the chat, and then we can read and then also respond to that. So currently, Prof, while we wait for people to maybe ask a question, I looked at the work that's currently happening also with Lelapa AI, and a lot of things has to do with translation. How accurate is those work at this point?
So with translation, okay, so let me explain typically how you train AI models, because this will be very instructive. So what tends to happen is that if you want to do translation, in the past, a long time ago, we would do something called rule-based translation. So what the rule-based translation is that, let's say you've got English and isiZulu. You would say that if you have a sentence that's written in a specific way in terms of the grammar in English, and you wanted to change it into isiZulu, you would have to, yes, it's replacing some of the words in terms of meaning, but then you must also keep to the grammatical correctness for the isiZulu. So you could come up with all those rules, and then from there you would do the translation. And what happened then is that IBM, for example, was one of the big companies initially who would come up with these rule-based translations for lots of different languages. It's not that they were 100% accurate, but then they were actually going towards, oh, you can do some type of automated translation. Now, what happens with more machine learning is you need to gather as much data as possible in which has parallel sentences, meaning that are in English and sentences that are in isiZulu, and they're the same ones, just that they're translated. We've got, I'll share a link to one data set that we've created for using Vukosi government newspaper that has all of these. So you can have isiXhosa and Siswati sentences. Once you've got those, you then give the machine learning model, you train it to learn almost those rules of translation by giving it lots and lots of these examples. So the challenge then becomes, how many of these examples do you have? How representative are they? Right? That's why I brought up the question of, you could be biased. A lot of the times for many languages, a lot of the data that is available comes from, example, religious texts, or comes from like translations of the Bible, or comes from organizations like the Jehovah's Witnesses, who are very prolific translators of their content. So that might be good for that, but it's not good for general use cases or in teaching, right? Because then you know that translations are probably going to be bad when you start asking about other subjects. So at Lelapa, as I said, like I spend my time there, I'm one of the co-founders. We then have to go and say, how do we find data that is more representative? How do we use better computational techniques to improve these types of things, to get to a point where we have more general systems that people could be using? Even your Google Translate, your Microsoft Translate, they still warn you and say, please do not use these as a replacement for human translators, because these systems are only as good almost as the data that comes inside. And getting data for our languages in this way is still a challenge.
Thank you so much. Prof, there's a question in the chat about your collaborating with higher education institutions, especially the language departments or centers. Sisonke was wondering whether you worked with entities like SADILAR.
SADILAR, yeah. I'll give a two-part answer. So at the Lapa, yes, we actually have things like collaborations with SADILAR directly. There's people we're working with, and then Lelapa does get into agreements with different stakeholders depending on what we're building and what we're working on at the time. I'm just trying to see what I can share. Okay, I'll share a LinkedIn link to one of our latest models or latest tools that we do, like in doing chatbots in our languages as well. And these were ones, like these are things that are out there. If you are in some of these organizations or municipalities, you might have actually been using our systems. It's just that we target other organizations. We don't go directly to consumers. On the other side, also at the University of Pretoria, our group works. For example, we have a collaboration at the moment we're doing with the library. It's not supremely public as yet, but I'll talk about it here. One of the things we've been doing is that we chose 50 PhD theses across the university and have translated their abstracts at the moment into isiZulu and Sesotho, and by human translation. And now we're going to try and benchmark and say how far do machine translate, how far does machine translation go, and how then can that inform us better improving computer-aided translation, so we can work with providing tools for translators to make their lives a little bit easier, but then in the scientific realm. All right, so with a library, they had to choose subjects across the university and see what we do. We work with African languages, we work with education faculty as well. So I spend a lot of my time, almost every day I'm in a different part of the university, depending on the area of things that we're interested in at that time. Because you have to be very transdisciplinary if you're working in these spaces. I cannot just stay in computer science. We won't really resolve the problems that we have in this space.
And thank you very much, Prof. That is quite interesting. And it's for us who are not in that field an eye-opener to see what kind of work is already happening with regards to the African languages, about chatbots and all of that. And as you have mentioned, there are many places where these things are rolled out as well. Is there any questions that you still want to ask? I just see Terence said.
Helping archive and train modules on Koi. Okay. I'm guessing this is recorded, but I will try to be as sensitive as possible in some of these things. So the other reason I think I came as a computing person in this space is also you have to humble yourself. There's lots of different ways to think about language and how language develops. So on my side as a computing person, I might just think about it as data. As long as I can get the data, we can build up these other systems. But what you find is to get access to that data, you really need to understand the needs of the communities that want to develop their languages. And in some cases, it's a bit harder. You find that getting access to content, is not something that's just we all agree that this is a problem, and then tomorrow you'll get the data. It requires building up trust, building up relationships over time. And I know for the Khoi, some of the Khoi languages, we are still building those trust. We will get there, I'm hoping, before it is catastrophic and we can't come back, but it's a slower process. It's easier for some languages and it's harder for others.
Thank you so much. One last opportunity for a question in the chat. Okay, so I think then that is it. Thank you so much, Prof. And we really appreciate.
Maybe, from my side, in terms of as a call to action, then why, Mari, I said yes, I can do this, even though at both at the Lapa they were asking like, no, can you do this? I'll do it. But the one part is that in the call to action is that we need to be the activists for our languages. If you find opportunity that for some of the material, even if it's like simple things, hey, I'm creating material, and then what I'll do right now is that the titles of every section, I will work to translate it into my language. It doesn't need to be perfect translations, just on doing that act helps. And then you make it saying, oh, I'm releasing this to people. It's a very important piece of work because it gets people to think. Sometimes then you talk to a few friends who speak that language, and some of them might be linguists or African language specialists, and then they say, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's translate like 100 titles into that language. These are the things that other people pick up and say like, oh, we can actually work with this and try to do something about it. There are resources out there. There are not that many. There are, but they are there. I will share one, which is something that we're building inside the university. I think I can find it. So I'm just trying to make sure I can find it. And we're trying to make sure that as many resources are available to people as possible. So this one that I shared now is a terminology list that we are putting together from other terminology lists across the country. So remember, there are open glossaries and terminology lists that have been funded by the South African government for like the last 20 or 30 years. What we found is that finding them has been hard, even for teachers and people, and they are also sometimes just in PDF, so it's not really good if you want to continue processing them and doing things. So we're working now. We've set ourselves an internal deadline as a group that by the end of the month, that list that you'll see right now only has two. One is one called the OERTB, which comes from UP, and then there's another one from Stats SA. But we're hoping that by the end of the year, for the end of this month, we're going to release all of the DSEC ones on sports and arts and culture, which are 16 of them that cover lots of subject areas. And then we are also hunting down all the other glossaries that were created by universities that were funded by the government, because those then actually are public assets. They don't just belong to that university. And we're trying to make sure that they're easily available to everybody. Why? We want people to have the tools to continue using their language in their areas in those aspects. So we're really happy, and anybody can really contact me if they say, oh, we actually have this that we've been doing. We just haven't been able to share it in an easier digital way. We will do the work to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Prof. For this is now the end of the symposium on this high linguistic note that we are ending. And we are going to move in now to the closing ceremony.